Have you ever wondered why the people we love the most are sometimes the ones who wound us the deepest? Why does the bond that once felt sacred and unbreakable turn into a source of bitterness and pain? And how can a son, the very child a mother once held in her arms, grow into a man who humiliates the woman who gave him life? Before we go any further, it's important to begin with a gentle reminder. What you're about to hear is not meant to label every family or every relationship. Human psychology is as complex and varied as the people who live it. The patterns we'll explore here are common but not universal. They are profound psychological dynamics that arise in some mother-son relationships, but certainly not in all. If this topic touches a nerve, know that you are not alone, and that understanding is the first step toward healing. Now, let's step into the heart of the matter. The bond between a mother and her son is supposed to be one of the deepest, most enduring connections in human life. From the moment he takes his first breath, she is there, protector, nurturer, guide. She wipes away his tears, stays awake through long nights of fever, sacrifices her own dreams so that his may come true. And yet, somewhere along the way, something begins to shift. The boy grows into a man, and with that transformation, tenderness sometimes turns into resentment. Warmth gives way to coldness. And, in the most painful cases, love becomes cruelty. A cruelty that manifests not in physical violence, but in cutting words, in humiliating silence, in deliberate rejection. Why does this happen? The answer, as Carl Jung revealed, lies not in the surface of behavior, but deep within the unconscious mind, in the shadows we rarely dare to face. When a son humiliates his mother, it is almost never about what she did last week, last month, or even last year. It is about the unresolved emotional storms buried within him. It is about the parts of himself he despises, fears, or cannot accept, and the uncomfortable truth that his mother, more than anyone else, reflects those parts back to him. Imagine a young man growing up in New York City. He has built a career, an identity, a life of independence, yet every time his mother calls to ask how he's doing, every time she offers advice or shows worry, he feels something twist inside. Irritation, anger, even shame. He might snap at her, make a cruel joke about how overbearing she is, or roll his eyes when she tries to hug him in public. To the outside world, these reactions seem disrespectful, even heartless. But to a depth psychologist, they are clues, signs that something unconscious is being triggered. For many men, their mothers symbolize the most vulnerable parts of themselves. The little boy who once cried for comfort, the teenager who felt lost, the adult who still longs to be unconditionally loved. Society, especially in places like America, where independence and self-sufficiency are prized above all, teaches men to bury that vulnerability. They are told to man up, to be strong, to never show weakness. And yet, their mothers, by their very existence, remind them of everything they were taught to suppress. This is why humiliation often becomes a defense mechanism. A man who cannot tolerate his own vulnerability tries to destroy the person who represents it. A son who cannot reconcile with his dependence tries to degrade the woman who once nurtured it. It is a tragic irony. In his desperate attempt to assert strength, he reveals the depth of his inner wounds. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. A son who never answers his mother's calls, who forgets birthdays, who criticizes her cooking or dismisses her opinions with condescension. In a culture where emotional avoidance is common, these behaviors might even seem normal, but beneath them lies the same psychological root: a struggle with the self that is projected outward onto the mother. And here's the hardest truth of all. Each act of humiliation is also an act of self-destruction. Because in degrading the woman who gave him life, the son is also degrading the part of himself that once needed her and still does. Every cutting remark is a rejection of his own history. Every cruel silence is a denial of his own humanity. But there is another side to this story, one that's less about blame and more about understanding. Some mothers, often unknowingly, participate in this painful dynamic. They cling too tightly, unable to let their sons grow up. They try to live through them, to control or guide them long after they've become adults. This creates a deep tension. The son craves independence, but the mother's love feels suffocating. Resentment builds, and humiliation becomes a twisted way of asserting autonomy. If you're watching this and recognizing fragments of your own life, whether as a son who struggles to express his love without anger, or as a mother who doesn't understand why her once loving child has turned distant, I want you to know something. This story is not over. Understanding these patterns is not about assigning blame. It's about breaking free from them. And this video is only the beginning. In the chapters ahead, we'll go deeper into the unconscious wounds that shape these dynamics, into the cultural forces that amplify them, and into the paths of healing that can transform humiliation into understanding and resentment into respect. Most importantly, we'll explore how both mother and son can reclaim their humanity, not by repeating old patterns, but by facing the shadows that created them. So stay with us, because once you understand what's truly happening beneath the surface, everything changes. And if you want to continue this journey, not just to understand these hidden dynamics, but to heal from them, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next steps of this powerful exploration. If Part 1 helped us glimpse the painful surface of why a son might humiliate his mother, then to truly understand this phenomenon, we must now dive much deeper into the hidden layers of the psyche where all human behavior begins. This is the realm Carl Jung devoted his life to exploring. The unconscious, the archetypes, and the shadow. The darker side of ourselves that we often fear to face. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What this means is that much of what we do, even the things that shock or shame us, is not born from deliberate intention. It is shaped by forces beneath the surface, by unresolved conflicts, repressed emotions, and forgotten memories that live on within us. They do not disappear simply because we ignore them. On the contrary, the more we deny them, the more power they gain over us. In the context of the mother-son relationship, the mother is not just a person. In the depths of a man's psyche, she becomes an archetype, what Jung called the Great Mother. This archetype is a powerful psychological symbol. She is warmth, nurture, comfort, and safety. But she is also dependence, vulnerability, and the primal memory of needing someone else to survive. She represents everything about being human that a man may be taught to suppress in order to be strong. And herein lies the paradox. The more a man tries to reject the vulnerable parts of himself, the more his mother becomes a mirror of those parts, and the harder it is for him to look at her without discomfort. The more fiercely he denies his own softness, the more intolerable her tenderness becomes. And as with any mirror that shows us what we don't want to see, the instinct is often to break it, to destroy the reflection rather than confront the truth. Take, for example, a man named David living in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up in a working-class immigrant family. His mother sacrificed everything to raise him, spending decades working in a laundromat so he could go to college. As a boy, David clung to her constantly. He was terrified of the dark, of being left alone, of disappointing her. But as an adult and a successful attorney, something changed. He began to dread her phone calls. He felt embarrassed when she showed up to his company's award ceremony wearing simple clothes. And one evening at dinner, when she accidentally dropped a plate, he sneered, "You really don't know how to act in fancy places, do you?" To David, it was just a careless comment. But to his mother, it was a knife to the heart, sharper and deeper than anything a stranger could ever say. From the outside, people might call David ungrateful or cruel. But, from a psychological perspective, his words were not about her at all. They were about him. Her presence triggered memories of vulnerability and dependence he could not bear. It reminded him of who he once was, a scared, powerless child, and that clashed violently with the self-image he had carefully built as a strong, independent man. His cruelty was not a sign of strength, but of fear. Humiliating his mother was his unconscious way of running from a past he hadn't yet made peace with. This process is what Jung called shadow projection. When we cannot accept something within ourselves, we often project it onto someone else and then fight it there. The son who humiliates his mother is often waging war not against her, but against the rejected parts of himself that she represents. Her softness irritates him because he fears his own. Her concern feels suffocating because he has never learned to embrace his need for connection. He mocks her emotions because he has been taught to deny his own. This is why so many men respond with sarcasm, irritation, or even contempt when their mothers express care. They call her too emotional, too controlling, or too dramatic. But what they are truly reacting to is not her behavior. It is their own inner discomfort. They are not mocking her tears. They are terrified of their own. They are not rejecting her love. They are terrified of needing it. But there is another layer to this dynamic. One that goes even deeper. Jung described something called the narcissistic wound, a deep, often unconscious shame about one's vulnerability. A mother is not only a caregiver, she is also a witness. She has seen her son at his weakest, crying over a broken toy, trembling after a nightmare, begging for comfort after heartbreak. And for many men, living in a culture that glorifies stoicism and strength, the fact that someone knows this about them feels unbearable. Her very presence becomes a threat to the identity they're trying to maintain. Humiliating her is not about hatred, it's about attempting to erase the part of themselves she remembers. This is why humiliation often grows stronger as a mother ages or becomes more dependent. Her vulnerability mirrors the son's own hidden fears of aging, of weakness, of mortality. In rejecting her, he believes he is rejecting those fears. But the truth is, they remain alive and unresolved within him, festering deeper each time he tries to escape them. Society makes all of this worse. In the United States, and particularly in large competitive cities like New York, masculinity is still deeply tied to self-sufficiency and control. Men are taught from a young age to be strong, independent, and unemotional. They are taught that needing love or showing tenderness is a weakness. And so, when their mothers embody these forbidden qualities, they lash out. They confuse detachment with maturity. They mistake cruelty for strength. I once spoke to a man who hadn't hugged his mother in over a decade. When I asked him why, he said, "It just feels childish." Think about that. A simple act of affection, something deeply human, was interpreted as a threat to his manhood. That is how powerful societal conditioning can be. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself in any part of this story, maybe as a son who has reacted harshly to love, or as a mother who has been on the receiving end of that pain, I invite you to pause here and reflect. Have you ever pushed someone away simply because they reminded you of a part of yourself you didn't want to see? And if so, what might happen if, instead of rejecting that part, you tried to understand it? You're welcome to share your experience in the comments below, not for judgment, but as a step toward awareness. Because once we name the patterns within us, they begin to lose their power. This is the paradox of the shadow. The more we deny it, the stronger it becomes. But when we turn toward it, when we name it, face it, integrate it, it starts to transform. And in that transformation, healing becomes possible. Understanding these psychological roots, the archetype of the mother, the projection of the shadow, the narcissistic wound, and the cultural expectations that reinforce them, is the first step in breaking free from the destructive patterns that bind mothers and sons together in pain. Only by shining light into these hidden corners of the psyche can we begin to change them. In the next part of this journey, we'll explore how these deep psychological forces manifest in everyday life, how humiliation becomes a twisted emotional language, how power dynamics form, and why these behaviors so often repeat themselves across generations. And most importantly, we'll discuss how awareness can begin to turn cruelty into compassion. It often starts quietly, not with screaming, not with slammed doors, but with something far more subtle. A sigh, a dismissive glance, a text left unanswered. The cruelty we are about to explore is rarely explosive at first. It creeps in like a shadow, weaving itself into daily life, becoming so familiar that both mother and son stop noticing how destructive it truly is. Yet beneath these small gestures lies a storm of unspoken emotions, resentment, guilt, shame, fear, all swirling beneath the surface. One of the most common manifestations of humiliation is emotional withdrawal. A son might stop calling, ignore messages, or forget to visit for months at a time. On the surface, it looks like simple busyness, a demanding job, a hectic life. But in reality, it is often a deliberate act of distancing, a passive-aggressive way to punish the mother without ever saying a word. In psychological terms, this is the avoidant defense mechanism. He removes himself physically to avoid confronting uncomfortable feelings emotionally. Take the story of Michael, a software engineer in Manhattan. As a teenager, he was extremely close to his mother. She was his confidant, the person he ran to after every heartbreak. But as he grew older, he began to feel smothered by her constant questions and concern. Instead of setting boundaries through honest conversation, Michael started ignoring her calls, responding to texts with one-word replies, and skipping family gatherings. His silence spoke louder than any insult could. It told her, "You no longer matter." For his mother, every ignored call felt like a wound. She replayed moments from his childhood in her mind, wondering where she had gone wrong. But what Michael was truly running from was not her. It was his own unresolved dependence. Each unanswered phone call was his attempt to prove to himself that he didn't need her anymore, even as part of him still did. Another manifestation is verbal humiliation, often cloaked as jokes, sarcasm, or honesty. It can sound like, "You always overreact, Mom. You're so dramatic. No wonder Dad left. Maybe if you had a life of your own, you wouldn't be so obsessed with mine." These are not just words. They are weapons designed to cut, to diminish, to assert power. They are the adult equivalent of a tantrum, but far more dangerous because they carry the weight of decades of unresolved emotion. Then, there's the form of humiliation that hides in public embarrassment. A son might mock his mother in front of friends, correct her harshly in public, or make her the butt of a joke at family gatherings. The aim is not humor. It's domination. By lowering her status in the eyes of others, he convinces himself that he has risen above the dependency he once felt. This behavior often escalates when roles begin to reverse, when the mother ages, becomes ill, or requires help. The once dependent child now holds the power, and instead of using it with compassion, he wields it like a weapon. He might criticize her for moving slowly, make fun of her memory lapses, or show visible annoyance at her physical needs. It is as if every moment of vulnerability she once witnessed in him now returns as vengeance. Why does this reversal happen? Because power and shame are deeply intertwined. Many men, unconsciously, feel shame about the years they needed their mothers. They remember the tears, the fears, the moments of helplessness, and they resent that. Someone saw them that way, so when the tables turn, they retaliate. They turn the mirror around, forcing their mothers to feel the very helplessness they once felt. And then there is perhaps the most painful manifestation of all, rejection during vulnerability. A mother who calls her son crying after a health diagnosis is told, "I'm too busy to talk." A son refuses to visit the hospital because he doesn't like that kind of stuff. A holiday invitation goes unanswered because he needs space. In these moments, humiliation reaches its cruelest form, not through words or actions, but through the complete denial of love when it's needed most. These patterns often repeat across generations. A man who humiliates his mother may have watched his father do the same. He may have grown up in a household where women were dismissed, mocked, or silenced. Without conscious effort, he unconsciously repeats what he learned, believing that belittling women, even his own mother, is normal. Likewise, a mother who tolerates this treatment may have grown up believing that love always requires self-sacrifice. She may accept humiliation because she equates it with connection. This cyclical nature is what makes the dynamic so difficult to break. Humiliation becomes the twisted language of an unresolved bond. The son's cruelty is not hatred. It's attachment gone wrong. It's the desperate attempt of someone who never truly separated to prove that he has. Ironically, the more aggressively he tries to push her away, the more entangled he remains. He fights not for independence, but against the invisible emotional umbilical cord he has never learned to cut. Psychologists often describe this as a state of emotional fusion, when two people are so psychologically intertwined that the only way they know how to assert individuality is through conflict. In such cases, humiliation isn't just cruelty, it's communication. The son doesn't know how to say, "I need space." Instead, he says, "You're suffocating me." He doesn't know how to say, "I still need you." Instead, he says, "You're useless." This is why many men feel trapped in a paradox. They love their mothers deeply, but cannot express it. They resent her influence, but cannot imagine life without it. They fight her fiercely, but are terrified of losing her. And the result is a relationship defined by a painful oscillation, swinging between closeness and rejection, affection and contempt, love and humiliation. One of the most telling signs of this pattern is the push and pull cycle. A son might ignore his mother for months, only to suddenly call when he needs advice, money, or emotional support. He may insult her one day and show affection the next. This inconsistency isn't randomness. It's the symptom of a deeper emotional confusion. He is torn between dependence and autonomy, love and fear, vulnerability and pride. You might be wondering now, have I ever participated in this cycle? As a son, as a mother, or even as an observer? It's an important question to ask, because awareness is the first step toward change. If you feel comfortable, share your reflections below. Sometimes speaking our truth, even anonymously, is the beginning of breaking a pattern we didn't know we were trapped in. Another tragic consequence of this dynamic is that it prevents both people from growing. The son, stuck in a perpetual rebellion, never learns what mature autonomy truly looks like, the ability to be independent and loving, strong and compassionate. The mother, trapped in a cycle of endurance, often loses sight of her own worth outside the role of caregiver. She sacrifices dignity in the name of love, unaware that such sacrifice only deepens the wound. In American culture, this cycle is often intensified by physical distance. Many adult children live far from their parents, sometimes in different states or even on opposite coasts. While distance can be healthy, it also provides fertile ground for avoidance. Phone calls go unanswered. Visits are delayed. Technology becomes a tool for passive-aggressive cruelty. Texts left on read, calls that never come, promises perpetually postponed. These small acts of neglect are often more painful than outright rejection because they create uncertainty, a lingering question in the mother's heart. Does my child still care? And yet, beneath all this cruelty, one truth remains. Humiliation is not the language of hate. It is the language of pain, a clumsy, destructive attempt to communicate something deeper. It says, I don't know how to be close without feeling suffocated. It says, I'm terrified of needing you. It says, I hate the parts of myself you remind me of. And sometimes it even says, I still love you, but I don't know how to show it. In the next chapter, we will turn the lens toward the other half of this equation, the mother's role. We'll explore how certain maternal behaviors unconsciously sustain this dynamic, why some mothers accept humiliation as the price of love, and what both sides must do to begin breaking the cycle. Because true healing is never a one-sided process. It requires courage, awareness, and transformation from both hearts involved. When we talk about the painful dynamic of a son humiliating his mother, our attention almost always focuses on the son, on his anger, his cruelty, his unconscious wounds. But as Carl Jung often reminded us, no dance is performed by one person alone. Every destructive pattern requires two participants. And while the son's actions may be the most visible, the mother's responses, often unconscious, often rooted in her own wounds, are just as crucial to understanding the full picture. The truth is that in many cases, mothers unknowingly contribute to sustaining this cycle of humiliation. This does not mean the blame falls on them, far from it. But it does mean that their internal psychology, their past experiences, and the ways they relate to their children can unintentionally keep the pattern alive. One of the deepest psychological reasons behind this lies in the identification with the maternal role. For many women, motherhood becomes not just one part of their identity. It becomes their entire identity. They pour everything they are into raising their children: time, energy, dreams, ambitions. Their sense of purpose, self-worth, and even existence becomes tied to being mom. And when the child grows up and begins to separate, a void opens, one that feels unbearable. This is why many mothers unconsciously cling to their role long after their children have become adults. They call too often, worry too much, offer advice even when it's not wanted. To them, it's love, a continuation of the nurturing that defined their lives. But to their sons, it can feel suffocating. And humiliation, as twisted as it is, becomes one way for a son to assert his independence and push back against the closeness he doesn't know how to handle. Take the example of Linda, a single mother living in Queens, New York. After her divorce, she dedicated her entire life to her son. She left her job, distanced herself from friends, and gave up hobbies so she could be fully present for him. But when he moved out and started his own life, Linda felt lost. She began calling every day, asking about every detail of his schedule, growing upset if he didn't respond. When he ignored her calls, she cried and told him, "I live only for you." To Linda, this was love, deep, sacrificial love. But to her son, it felt like a chain around his neck. Resentment built up, and eventually, it boiled over. One day, in a burst of frustration, he shouted, "Just stop, Mom! You're driving me insane!" And tragically, Linda accepted this outburst as part of motherhood. She told herself, "He's just stressed. He doesn't mean it." And so, the cycle continued. This is a psychological mechanism therapists call self-sacrificial love. The belief that love means tolerating anything, even abuse. A mother who subscribes to this belief equates suffering with devotion. She thinks that enduring humiliation is the price she must pay to maintain her connection with her son. As long as the bond, even a painful one, remains, she feels she still has a place in his life. But here is the painful irony. Tolerating humiliation does not make a son love his mother more. It often makes him respect her less. When one person sets no boundaries, the other learns to cross them. When one person allows themselves to be humiliated, the other begins to believe such behavior is acceptable. Another powerful factor is the mother's own unresolved trauma. Many women grew up in households where their worth was minimized, where they watched their mothers endure humiliation in silence. They were taught that a woman's job is to keep the peace, that love requires endurance, that family harmony is more important than self-respect. These lessons become deeply ingrained, and when these women become mothers, they unconsciously repeat what they learned, not because they want to, but because it's the only pattern they know. Some mothers also unconsciously maintain the connection by adopting the role of the perpetual victim. They believe that if they remain weak, their sons will continue to feel powerful and, therefore, continue to stay connected. In their minds, being the target of cruelty is better than being irrelevant. If they stand up for themselves, they fear their sons might leave. So they remain silent, allowing the humiliation to continue as the price of proximity. This creates a toxic dynamic. The son humiliates to assert autonomy, while the mother accepts humiliation to preserve connection. Both are acting from fear. The son fears losing himself. The mother fears losing her child. And tragically, both actions drive them further apart instead of bringing them closer. It's important to emphasize again, this does not mean mothers choose to be humiliated. Most of this happens far below the level of conscious awareness. They are not weak. They are wounded. They are not foolish. They are human, shaped by stories of love and sacrifice that society has told them for generations. But the fact that they didn't consciously choose this pattern doesn't mean they're powerless to change it. In fact, the power to end the cycle often begins with them. The first step is reclaiming a sense of identity beyond motherhood. A woman is not only a mother, she is an individual with dreams, passions, intelligence, and value far beyond her maternal role. When a mother builds a meaningful life that is hers alone, a career, friendships, hobbies, community, she is no longer bound by the fear of losing her child. She no longer clings out of emptiness. And from that place of wholeness, she can set boundaries with strength and dignity. The second step is learning to say no to humiliation. Love never requires the abandonment of self-respect. Setting boundaries does not mean love is fading. It means love is evolving. When a mother calmly and firmly says, You may be angry, but you cannot speak to me that way. She is not pushing her son away. She is teaching him one of life's most essential lessons, that love and respect must walk hand in hand. The third step is healing her own wounds. This may involve therapy, support groups, journaling, or deep introspection. It might mean confronting painful memories from her past, moments when she was made to feel small or unworthy. It might mean forgiving herself for the times she allowed disrespect to continue. Healing is not easy, but it is necessary, because a healed mother becomes a powerful model for a healing son. You might wonder, will setting boundaries push my son further away? The honest answer is yes. Perhaps at first. Change always creates resistance. But in the long run, those boundaries become the foundation for a healthier, more mature relationship. When a mother learns to love herself, she teaches her son that love is not about sacrifice and submission. It's about mutual respect and authenticity. And here is something many mothers forget. Your worth is not determined by how much you endure. It is not measured by how many insults you absorb or how many times you are mistreated without protest. Your worth was never dependent on your son's behavior. It was always yours from the very beginning. Healing this dynamic requires both people to confront uncomfortable truths. The son must face the reality that his cruelty reflects his inner wounds. The mother must recognize that tolerating cruelty is not love. It is fear wearing the mask of devotion. When both are willing to do this work, something extraordinary becomes possible. The relationship can be reborn, not as a bond defined by guilt, dependence, or resentment, but as one built on mutual respect, healthy independence, and genuine love. In the final part of this journey, we will look at the path to healing, the steps both mother and son must take to transform their relationship from one built on humiliation and pain into one rooted in understanding, compassion, and mature connection. Because the story does not have to end in bitterness. With awareness, courage, and love, even the deepest wounds can become the foundation for the strongest bonds. Every story we've explored so far, every harsh word, every wounded silence, every hidden resentment, leads us here to the question that matters most. Can a relationship that has been poisoned by humiliation, anger, and pain ever truly heal? The answer, perhaps surprisingly, is yes. But the path to that healing is not a straight line. It is not paved with simple apologies or fleeting gestures. It is a journey, one that demands courage, humility, awareness, and above all, love. It is the hardest journey two people will ever take together, but if they dare to walk it, it can transform not only their relationship, but their entire lives. The first and most vital step on this path is awareness. Nothing can change until it is seen clearly. Both mother and son must be willing to look honestly at what has happened, not through the lens of blame or justification, but with the courage to face reality. The son must admit that his cruelty is not a sign of strength, but a reflection of unhealed wounds. The mother must recognize that enduring humiliation is not love, but a fear-based pattern learned long ago. Only when the masks are removed can the real work begin. This awareness is not easy. It requires each person to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. For the son, it might mean acknowledging that his anger is rooted in childhood pain, perhaps a fear of being vulnerable, a shame of needing care, or a deep insecurity masked by arrogance. For the mother, it might mean accepting that her self-worth became too dependent on her role, that she struggled to let go, or that she equated sacrifice with love. These revelations can feel like earthquakes within the soul, but they are necessary ones, because without awareness, the past will keep repeating itself. The next step is communication, honest, vulnerable, and intentional. Healing does not happen in silence. The wounds we do not speak of are the ones that control us. This means creating a space where mother and son can speak openly, without fear of judgment or attack. It means saying the things that have remained unspoken for years. The anger, the guilt, the regrets, the love that was always there but got buried beneath resentment. Imagine a conversation like this. Mum, I'm sorry for the things I said. I know I hurt you. I was trying to run from parts of myself I didn't want to see. Or, Son, I realize now that I held on too tightly. I didn't know how to let you go, but I see now how that suffocated you. These words do not erase the past, but they open a door, and through that door, something new can enter. Empathy, the ability to see not just the other person's behavior, but the pain beneath it. The son begins to understand that his mother's overprotection was not control. It was fear of losing the most precious thing in her life. The mother begins to see that her son's cruelty was not hatred. It was confusion, shame, and the desperate struggle to grow up. And in that shared understanding, compassion is born. The third step is boundaries, healthy, loving, and firm. Healing is not about going back to the way things were. It's about building something new, a relationship where both people are free, respected, and whole. This means the son learns to set boundaries without cruelty. He learns to say, I need space, without needing to push his mother away, and the mother learns to love without losing herself. She learns that saying no to disrespect is not a rejection of her son. It is an act of self-respect that teaches him how to love her better. Boundaries are not walls. They are bridges, structures that allow two people to meet in the middle without losing themselves in the process. And once they are in place, something beautiful begins to grow. Mutual respect. The son stops seeing his mother as a threat to his autonomy. The mother stops seeing her son as the sole source of her worth. They begin to relate to each other not as a helpless child and a controlling parent, but as two adults, equal, autonomous, and connected. The fourth step is forgiveness, deep, conscious, and ongoing. Forgiveness is not about forgetting or excusing what happened. It is about releasing the grip of the past on the present. It is about choosing not to let old wounds define who you are or how you love. For the son, forgiveness means letting go of resentment, not because his mother was perfect, but because holding on to anger only keeps him trapped. For the mother, forgiveness means freeing herself from guilt. Not because she did everything right, but because shame serves no one. Forgiveness is a process, not a moment. Some days it will feel natural, other days it will feel impossible, but each time it is chosen, even in small ways, the grip of the past loosens a little more, and with each release, space is created for something new, for tenderness, for joy, for love, without conditions. Finally, the last step, the one that brings everything together, is growth. Healing is not about returning to who we were before the wounds. It is about becoming who we were always meant to be because of them. The pain, once integrated, becomes wisdom. The shadows once faced become strength. And the relationship once broken becomes something far more resilient and real than it ever could have been without the struggle. Growth means the son learns to embrace vulnerability, to see it not as weakness, but as the very essence of human connection. It means he no longer fears needing his mother's love, because he understands that needing love is not childish. It's human. Growth means the mother learns to embrace her own identity, to know that she is worthy and whole, even beyond her role as a mother. It means she loves her son not out of fear of losing him, but from a place of freedom and fullness. And perhaps most beautifully of all, growth means they learn to love each other in a new way, not as a mother and child trapped in a cycle of dependence and rebellion, but as two souls who have walked through the fire and emerged stronger, softer, and more deeply connected. Maybe that's the greatest paradox of all, that the very wounds which once seemed to destroy the bond can become the foundation on which it is rebuilt. As Jung said, the greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, only outgrown. We do not solve the problem of humiliation. We grow beyond it. And in that growth, love is reborn. So, if you are watching this and you see pieces of your own story here, whether you are a mother who has endured years of disrespect or a son who regrets the pain you've caused, know this: it is not too late. Healing is always possible. Change is always possible. And it begins not with grand gestures, but with small acts of awareness, honesty, and courage. Begin with one conversation, one boundary, one moment of forgiveness, and from there, keep going. Because the bond that once felt broken beyond repair can become the most profound connection of your life. If this journey has spoken to your heart, I invite you to reflect. What would healing look like for you? And what is one small step you can take today toward that healing? Share your thoughts in the comments, not for anyone else, but for yourself. Sometimes writing our truth is the first step toward living it. And if you're ready to continue exploring the deeper layers of the human psyche, to uncover more hidden patterns, to heal old wounds, and to grow into the fullest version of yourself, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Because the conversations we have here are not just about psychology, they're about transformation. May this be the beginning of a new chapter, one where love is no longer tangled with pain, where respect and tenderness walk side by side, and where both mother and son finally find peace, not in the past, but in the present moment, where all healing truly begins. May you and those you love find the courage to speak, the strength to forgive, and the wisdom to love without fear. The journey is not easy, but it is worth it. And somewhere beyond the wounds, there is a bond waiting to be reborn, deeper, stronger, and more beautiful than before.